Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with the second installment of the Release the Craftin book club, which is pretty exciting. We're on month 2. We did it. I read another book. I'm going to talk about it. Right up the top, I'm going to say to please excuse the dinginess of my fingers because I have been coffee dyeing and I'm not prepared enough to use my PPE to like protect myself from that situation. So they're grungy looking, but we're just going to roll with it and everyone acknowledge that I craft for almost a living. So, 'tis what it is. But here we go. We are talking about Psyche and Eros by Luna McNamara. That's the book that we read for February, and I am super excited to talk about it because I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to do what I did last time. I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings spoiler-free, and then I will let you know when I get into spoilers. So if you're interested in reading the book for yourself, you don't have it ruined by an unexpected spoiler. And then, for those of you who weren't able to join in the book club last month or this month, I'm going to let you guys know right off the top what next month's book is going to be in case you want to join. So next month, we're going to be doing Medusa Sisters by Lauren J.A. Bear. And I'm really excited for that one, but that's next month. So we're going to get into that later. I will say right now, this is an open book club, so if you are interested in joining, you can join for however many months you want, whatever month you want. Just let me know that you're joining, and I can add you to the chat that we have over on Instagram, and it is really cool. We had a really great discussion for last month's book, Atalanta, and, like, it was really enjoyable. We had a really great time, and I'm looking forward to talking about Psyche and Eros once this goes up and we're done with that and everybody gets finished with their book. So if you would like to join in all the fun, we're having fun. I guarantee that. Well, let me know. Drop a line, read a book, join the club. It's as simple as that. So Psyche and Eros. Okay, I liked this book. I liked this book a lot. I don't know if I liked it more than Atalanta, and I don't know if I want to get into the habit of comparing things to the book I just previously read, so I'm not going to go into that thought process, but I really enjoyed this book. It was a romance, but it didn't read to me as like a straightforward romance, I guess. It wasn't very flowery. There wasn't a lot of time spent in there. There was a lot more time spent in the characters' heads, sort of as they were processing their own emotions, but also just sort of engaging with the things that were happening around them. And you know, that's typical for books. Like, that's not a special thing for books. But in this book, it just really worked for me, and it made the romance aspects like believable and like easier to digest, because I'm not a super romance fan. So I was a little bit concerned when I picked this book that I was going to be like really in your face and a lot of romance, but it wasn't. So I really enjoyed that. It was a standard romance, but it wasn't standard, if that makes any sense. That doesn't make any sense. But I really enjoyed the book. It took like a couple of different spins on some characters that I didn't really anticipate, but they ended up working out for the overall like feel of the story really well. And we even got like a callback to last month's book. That character makes an appearance very early on, and that was also really interesting to just see a sort of a different take on the character. It left me with some more questions because it sort of diverted from the myth a little bit, but otherwise it was fine. Like, it totally works for the context of the story. There were a couple of points where I was like, oh, no closure, no resolution there? Okay. Fine. But otherwise, like, it wasn't, like, essential, like, plot essential resolution that I was looking for. It was little side thoughts and stuff like that that just didn't seem to get wrapped up neatly in a bow like I would like, or confronted again at a later point. Or at least if they did, it seemed to be, like, off the page. And that's okay, but, like, because, you know, like, it wasn't the main story. So I wasn't upset about that. I really enjoyed Psyche as a character. I found her to be, like, really straightforward and just an interestingly, like, blunt, but not, like, obtusely so. And I appreciated that about her character. I also appreciated just how, like, rational she was in her approach to things. There wasn't a lot of, like, forced misunderstanding. There was a little bit of misunderstanding, but more because somebody wasn't being honest than like, oh no, we all just conveniently misunderstood each other and now the plot is happening. That didn't happen. So like, thankfully for that. She's a really well-written female character who has like a very serious goal in mind and is trying to accomplish that, and then finds her life to be going on a different path than what she had originally anticipated, and continues to like adapt to that with grace, even though she's disappointed that like the future that she thought she was going to have isn't the future that was meant for her. And that's a really like great way to sort of portray that. I think it worked really well for her character. I think I really appreciated that take in the story, instead of it just being like super straightforward. That, you know, this was how it was always going to be. Like, she had a different goal in mind. She had her own plans in mind, and she was disappointed when it didn't work out like that, but also sort of intrigued as to what that meant for herself, and how she could interpret that and like reframe it in a narrative that works for her. So I really liked that. I also liked Sad Boy Eros. He was really sad boy, like in the beginning part of this book, and it worked for me. I think it really worked. It really sort of illuminates the experience of like an immortal being over ages and eons and all that time. Like, you can see how he got to that point. And he's also like a little bit sassy. And like, that was also fun. And like, I just enjoyed his level of snark, and also his sort of like casual dismissal of everybody else's feelings because he's over it. I thought that made him a really believable character, and you see the most growth in his character in the book. So that was also like really enjoyable. And I think the story worked overall. I liked the side characters. I liked the portrayal of the other gods. I liked that this story also sort of had a like, here's what happens when you anger the gods and how petty they can be, sort of aspect to it. And that was interesting just to read about and see like the author's take on that. So overall, I really enjoyed this story. I don't even remember if I rated Atalanta last time, but ratings really don't mean anything to me. So we're going to give this 11 arrows out of nothing. That doesn't matter, because that doesn't matter. I enjoyed this. I would recommend it, especially if you're looking for a romance book that isn't really heavy on a romantic subplot, but wraps itself up as a romance. This was enjoyable, and if you're interested in the myth of Psyche and Eros, this is pretty close to the actual like myth without like spoiling anything, but it does expand on certain areas that are sort of left blank, and aren't brought up really in particular in the myth. So the things that it expands on don't really deviate from the course in the Psyche and Eros mythology. It does in other mythologies though, so that's something to keep in mind. But as a retelling, I really enjoyed it. I think it works, and I think it sort of enhanced my opinion, or like expanded my opinion of the Psyche and Eros mythos to begin with. So like, that worked out really well. So, spoiler time. Spoilers. Get out of here if you don't want them, because they're happening right now. But I'm gonna have I'm gonna have a drink of my coffee first, because I've been talking a lot. Okay, so I don't know if I'm gonna do this like I did the Atalanta one, where I just broke down the entire plot. I don't know what I was on. I was on like a million miles a minute that day, and decided to tell you guys the entire story, and every aspect of my thoughts as I experienced it. I don't know if I'm gonna do that. This might be a more truncated version, because the story is not nearly as complex, and I don't have as much negative like takeaways for this story as I did for Atalanta. But I would say like, I enjoyed them both equally in their own rights for what they're worth and what they brought to the, I don't know, the library of my brain. Starting off the top, I listened to this again, so this was another audiobook that I listened to. Sneak peeks and all of my stuff. I was just trying to get the cat hair off. Hold on. It's not going anywhere. There we go. So, just derail my own review. I listened to the audiobook. That's where I was. And I really enjoyed the narrators for the audiobook, but I will say that the narrator they chose for Eros is not anybody I would have ever picked at any point in time to be Eros. But eventually, as the time went on, he really grew on me as Eros. I was like, okay. But at first I was like, nah, this guy is this guy's not doing it for me. Like, I'm expecting something like sultry, something a little bit more like akin to the role of the god of desire, essentially. And he was a little bit flat to start out with, but then I sort of wrote that off as like, okay, well, he's sad boy Eros right now, so like he has to be flat. But then as the story progressed and he started to get happier, I was like, oh, he's gonna talk like this the entire time. And that also like irked me a little bit, but then by the end I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. He does have like a classically beautiful voice. The narrator's not bad by any means. He has a great voice. He's just not the voice I would have probably picked for Eros. But at the same time, like, I didn't need to like have a voice thirst trap in this story. I would not have finished it. So it worked out fine. But I will say by the end of it, he eventually grew on me. But his parts, I had to speed up to like 1.3, like time speed, to just sort of make it feel like I wasn't listening to somebody read me a bedtime story. So that's a little bit about how flat he sounded in comparison to Psyche, who was like, her voice was very like brisk, and so her sections of the story I had to listen at regular speeds. I had to keep flipping back and forth when they flipped chapters, because she talked at a regular fast speaking pace. Like her speaking pace was normal, and her voice worked out really well. She had a very strong voice, which I really appreciated, because in this book, Psyche is billed as like a warrior, right? She gets raised as a warrior. Her whole thing is that there's a prophecy made about her at the time of her birth that she will conquer a monster that the gods fear themselves. And so they start training her to be like a hero and a warrior, and she gets trained by Atalanta, and she learns all these things. So like I would think somebody with that sort of upbringing would have like a richer voice. And her voice was rich. It was strong. It was beautiful. Perfect. Worked perfectly fine. I would not recast her voice whatsoever. And like I said, by the end of the book, I was like, okay, this Eros version has grown on me, so it works just fine. He just needed to be like a little bit faster, I think, is the takeaway that I had for that. But into the story, I really enjoyed this. The thing that like threw me off that I was talking about in the other one was not the retelling of the Psyche and Eros myth. That didn't really like Eros myth, spaces between words. Like their retelling didn't really deviate from the original all that much. They just sort of added, like Luna added stuff to the story that sort of fleshed out them as characters and gave like Psyche a well-rounded backstory, gave Eros like some motivations and why he would act this way, like a little bit more understanding. So their myth didn't really change that much. And if you need like a comparison, I did that on Storycraft last year for Valentine's Day, or around Valentine's Day, and you can hear like the version of the myth that I know, and see where I'm coming from there if you haven't heard that already. But the myths for other people changed, and that was the thing that I was like, weird. So for the case of Aeolus and Hyacinthus, it isn't, in the original mythology as I understood it, it isn't Apollo who throws the discus that kills Hyacinthus because he doesn't want anyone else to have him. It's Aeolus throwing the discus off course, so that like he can get revenge for Apollo and Hyacinthus hooking up and being together, because he wanted to be with Hyacinthus in the first place. So in this one, they sort of flipped that and made Aeolus it was Aeolus, right? Am I just making up wind? I know Aeolus is one of the wind god names. I don't know if this is the right wind god, and I'm going to look at that in just a second. But, my brain. So they flipped that story and made it so that Aeolus was like the victim of Apollo's like cruelty in this story, which I think works in the context of the story because it was sort of alluding to how petty the gods can be. And I'll get to the petty queen in a second. But the other person whose myth got a little bit like altered for the sake of this story was Atalanta. And Atalanta comes in to train Psyche, and she like gets to see her later on down the line when she's also dying of like breast cancer. And the whole experience is sort of to demonstrate to Psyche like what happens when you are a hero, especially as a woman, and like the sad tragic fate of heroes. And like basically, you know, Atalanta in the story dies alone. Both of her husband, or her lover and her husband, are gone. And she dies alone in the woods from a disease, and nobody knows about it. Nobody's there to care for her. Like, she dies without any fanfare. And, like, thankfully she gets reunited with both of the men that she loved in her afterlife. So she does get rewarded for that in the afterlife. But it's sort of to show Psyche, because her theme, her message isn't like, you're going to be a hero. It's like, be more than a hero, because this is the sad fate of heroes. And I liked that tie-in, but then I was like, we just read Atalanta, and if you read Atalanta last month with me, you know that her myth ends in them becoming lions because they desecrated Rhea's temple, and in this one she said Aphrodite's temple, and that's why Aphrodite killed her husband. And I was like, interesting changes. This might be alternate versions of the myth that I don't know, but at the same time I was like, weird to change it, and weird to change it, like, for the change to show up, like, right after we read Atalanta, so I was, like, fresh in mind of her myth, enough to be like, hey, what? That's not what happened. Okay, and I just looked it up. I was wrong. I have all my wind gods mixed up. It's Zephyrus, not Aeolus. So, pretend I said Zephyrus this entire time. Zephyrus is the wind god that is in this story. And since I don't really have much else to say about Zephyrus, I'm just going to add in here, I liked his character. He was sort of a snarky, a little bit on the, like, sassy gay best friend stereotype, but, like, not so obnoxiously that I was like, nah, I hate this stereotype. It worked out fine for the story. It wasn't super, like, intrusive to the reading process, or it didn't obstruct anything in the story or anything whatsoever. So it worked out fine. He was fun. He has his own little, like, character growth where he goes from being a petty Betty to a, like, mischievous little asshole to a, oh my god, I'm so sorry, I was a shitty friend, and he comes around in the end. So his little character story, his little character arc worked out really well, because essentially he's just really mad at Eros, like, in the middle of the story, because he blames Eros for not, like, trying to reverse the love sickness that he was feeling for Hyacinthus, because he tried to do it for himself, and, like, it didn't work for Eros, so it really wasn't going to work for Zephyrus either, but he wasn't, like, willing to hear that. He wanted, you know, his results the way that he wanted them. So to get back at him, he sets off the whole story in motion between Psyche and Eros. He sets off their whole relationship. So, to backpedal a little bit, since we're talking about petty gods, doing petty god things, Aphrodite is heinous in this book. She's so heinous to the point where I was like, man, I love Aphrodite, and I'm aware of her mythology enough to know that she literally is the petty queen of mythology. But, like, this version makes me loathe Aphrodite, and I don't even want to, like, engage with her, and that's not bueno. That's no bueno, because as a pagan, I work with her a lot. So I was like, oh, I can't internalize this version of her whatsoever, because, wow, it made me really dislike her. But I did think it was interesting, because knowing the mythology like I do, I know that Eros is older than Aphrodite, but I never understood how Eros became Aphrodite's son in, like, the versions of the myth. But they explained it in here, and I was like, oh, well, this makes perfect freaking sense, because Eros opts to not join in the Titan Maki and, like, help the Olympians fight the Titans, and he chooses to just stay minding his own business, which, like, we love an unbothered king. But eventually what happens is Zeus, you know, goes around and punishes everybody who either helped the Titans or didn't help them specifically, which, like, bro, that's a strong stance to take, but it's Zeus. We know how Zeus is. So, he goes out of his way to make a god of love. So he makes Aphrodite, and then sends her to Eros to sort of subjugate him, so that he can have the gods underneath his control. And the options were either marry Aphrodite, which she was like, gross, I don't want to, or as Aphrodite ends up suggesting herself, she was going to say that he was her son, and it was just going to be like that moving forward. And as I thought about it, I was like, huh, that's probably exactly what happened. And that made, like, crazy sense to me, and I just never considered that as, like, a reason why the mythology for Eros got changed up, because he existed, like, before. before the Titans, before. So I was like, okay, interesting. So like the little bit of like historical breakdown you get about the Titan Maki, and then like the things that follow after, even the stuff that comes before the Titan Maki. So before the Olympians existed, Eros was there, and he tells his whole like story experience, and you get to hear about how he emerged out of Erebus with his sister Eris. And Eris was interesting. I wish she had more time in the book. Because Eris is the goddess of discord and chaos, so it works, discord and desire. It works really well. It was also giving Sandman. If you guys are familiar with Neil Gaiman's Sandman, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. But because everybody has D attributes in their name, the letter D. So discord, desire, just the whole thing. So Eris is... At first, she tells her brother, like, they could be together, which Eros immediately rejects, because he's like, gross. I know it's a custom, but, like, gross. I don't want that. And then she, like, takes his rebuttal. She fucks off. She comes back to, like, antagonize him every so often. And he's, like, you know, they're living the brother-sister life, where he's like, oh, my God, you're such a pain in my ass. And she's like, yeah, I know. I'm doing it on purpose. And, like, that's, like, their relationship. And, she shows up time to time in the story to be like his sister in that sisterly role, where she's like just slightly antagonizing him, but also a little bit low-key helping him. And then towards the end of the book, she shows up to actually help him, and he's like amazed, because he's like, oh, you're not gonna like fuck up my life again? And she's like, no, I'm your fucking sister. I actually love you and care about you. And this is like where Eros starts to realize that he's like been a jerk for hundreds of years, because his whole like melancholy vibe and like woe is me feeling sort of isolated him and cut him off from everybody who actually did care about him, like his sister. But I wish that she had more to do in the story. I wanted to see more of Eris in the story, just to see her like do more chaotic things. Like she shows up to talk about how she started this whole thing with the war in Troy, or it's mentioned that she started the whole thing with the war in Troy, but they don't actually show us that, and that's like the part that I was like hungry for, because the war in Troy, the whole conflict with Helen of Troy, and how the Greeks are treating everybody, like that whole situation takes place behind the scenes as like the B plot in this story. And so when they like start to introduce like the elements of Troy, I was like, oh, I want to see, like, Eris fuck some shit up. I want to see what happens when she tosses that apple out there and says it's for the fairest. And, like, I want to see the gods bicker over it. And we didn't get to see that. It all happened off the pages, and that made me sad. It made me sad. But, yeah, I wish we had gotten to see more of Eris's character. So, essentially, for Eros, he starts out telling us his whole life story, basically, and all the way up to the present day, and then how he's just sort of super sad and is trying to find ways to die. And while he's in his, like, whole melancholy, I want to end my immortal existence, like, life space, Aphrodite shows up because she is pissed at Psyche. Psyche in particular, she's mad at Psyche because everybody else is talking about how beautiful she is. Because by the time Psyche gets done with like her training and she goes into adulthood, everyone is like, oh my gosh, what a stunner. And because she's just a genuinely nice person who's really down to earth, you know, she engages with like the small folk. I don't know, like a better way to say that. That's how Game of Thrones taught me. So she engages with like the small folk, and people who see her are like, wow, you're more beautiful than Aphrodite. Like, they're all amazed at how beautiful she became when she got older. And she was already, like, among them so long because she was, like, joining her father to go on hunts and doing all the warrior training and stuff like that. So she was always out and about among her people. So eventually they start talking about how beautiful she is. And then Aphrodite's takeaway was, Psyche thinks she's more beautiful than me. Which, like... No, no, she doesn't, but that's how Aphrodite ends up interpreting it. So, to get revenge, Aphrodite takes one of Eros's arrows. That's ooh, wow, that's hard to say. And puts a curse on it so that when she gets hit with this arrow, whoever she falls in love with, once they like look into each other's eyes, they meet each other face to face, they'll be separated forever. And Eros is kind of like over the whole world at this point and existence in general. So he's like, yeah, okay, whatever, I'll do your little thing. When he goes to actually hit Psyche with this arrow, he ends up accidentally hitting himself, which I'm like, way to fumble the bat for the first time in like millennia. But he does, and he ends up being the one to fall in love with Psyche, and he knows that he can never see her because if he sees her, they'll be separated forever. And also, he can't tell Aphrodite that he fucked up. So he decides to just continue to internalize everything, and this is when the whole conflict between him and Zephyrus, they're besties at this point, but this is when the whole conflict breaks down because Zephyrus is upset over the death of Hyacinthus, and Eros is trying to find ways to undo the curse, and Zephyrus is like, how dare you not help me with my problem and only help yourself, and he's like, I am cursed, your lover is dead, like, get over it. And it's not the gentlest of ways to handle things, but, like, for real, though, he wasn't wrong. So that's when Zephyrus gets the big idea to sort of scoop up Psyche and bring her up to Eros's, like, seaside palace. And they set their whole story in motion. So by this point, stay awake. By this point, Psyche has been trained by Atalanta, who is delightful in her role as like an older woman who's already been through all the bullshit and is only willing to train Psyche because Psyche ends up proving herself capable and intelligent enough to handle the process. And then she dips when she says that Psyche is, you know, basically ready to conquer any monster she comes up against, because they're all thinking it's going to be a monster. Because what else would the gods fear? It's got to be some kind of giant, horrible, terrible monster, and Psyche's the only one prophesized to be able to defeat it. And so Psyche's like ready. She's like hungry to do this, and then she gets scooped away from this monster that she thinks she's gonna fight. Turns out to be Zephyrus, just being like a dick to villagers. She gets scooped away by Zephyrus, and then ends up in Eros's palace. And Eros decides to not only do the whole like, you can't look at me, so everything is gonna be dark at night, no lamps in the house, and I'm gonna fuck off during the day so that I don't have to look at you, so we don't have to have like deal with the consequences of this curse. Because once the curse gets triggered, Aphrodite will know that Eros fucked up. So he's still trying to find a cure for this, but at the same time, they're meeting up at night to talk and chill and hang out. And while they're talking and chilling and hanging out, which I appreciate that they're talking and chilling and hanging out and not immediately going into a sexual relationship like in the myth, you know, he tells her like, hey, you're my wife now, even though they didn't get married. And he ends up lying to her about who he is and doesn't tell her that he's Eros. He tells her that he's Cupid, which is a name that is known to him from like smaller minor groups of like villagers way off in the countryside, so she wouldn't even know who it is. So he lies to her, tells her that he's like a minor deity, and that his name is Cupid. So she's thinking that she's like married to just a minor god who nobody's ever heard of. And she thinks it's really weird that they're married all of a sudden because she just showed up and, you know, got abducted. And she's just trying to navigate living in the palace of a god while also trying to figure out what the hell is actually happening with her husband. And he's trying desperately to get cured. And this whole time I thought was like a really good developmental time for their relationship. They got to talk to each other. They got to get to know each other a little bit, see how the other person acts. Psyche got to come out of her shell a little bit and be like, hey, like, let me show you what I can do. Let me show you how capable I am. And Eros finds himself sort of relaxing a bit around her, and getting more comfortable and sort of letting those walls that he had put up for years sort of break down a little bit while they're together and engaged. And then this fool of a god, okay, decides that they're gonna go, first they go to Prometheus. They go to see Prometheus, and that's when, that's a good idea. The good idea, okay? They go see Prometheus. And that's when Prometheus tells Psyche that she's not actually going to be a hero like she thought she was. She's going to be known for being a great lover. And she's like, what the duck? Like, why? How? wow, that doesn't make any sense. All I've done in my life is train to be a hero who defeats monsters, and Prometheus doesn't give her more to follow up on. He just lets her chew on that for a while, and she is distraught because like this has shaped her whole worldview for her whole life, and now it's changing, and you know, she's not going to be the person that she thought she was going to be, and she has to sort of reconcile that, and I love that process for her. But then he basically tells like Eros, like, quit lying to your wife, you dumb, and just be in love. And Eros is like, cool, that's not a solution. So what he starts to think is that if he can get Psyche to go to the underworld for him and get some waters from the river Levy, that they'll be able to forget, because those are the waters that you drink when you pass away, to forget your mortal life. So he's like, if I can forget that I'm in love with her, then the curse will be broken, like, and it won't work. But he forgets that you're supposed to give a gift of an offering to the underworld if you're traveling as a living person into the underworld. And because gods can't go, Psyche has to go, and he sends her without a gift. So she ends up dying for a minute until he pulls her back through, and like she gets to be like revived. And this entire experience is interesting because while she's there, her psychopomp is Medusa. So she gets to meet Medusa, who calls her granddaughter, and like she keeps calling her granddaughter, but they never actually say if there's an actual blood relation between them, outside of the fact that like their families are interconnected. Perseus, yes, because Theseus killed the Minotaur. Perseus is like her great grandfather, and he's the one who killed her in the first place, and she's the one who puts into Psyche's head that a hero is not necessarily a good thing to be, because like, how do you know what a hero is? What makes a hero a hero? And like, she wasn't a monster, she was a woman minding her own business, who then became vilified and had to deal with people constantly coming after her, because they wanted the glory of killing the monster. So like, hearing this story from another person's perspective sort of gives Psyche more to like chew on the actual like nature of being a hero and what that means for her, and whether or not she actually needs to pursue being a hero in the sense that she thought, because like she might be wrong, or you know, like the monsters that she's chasing aren't actual monsters. Like she doesn't have the right perspective because she's not seeing it from all sides. So she gets to have that really interesting conversation, and then when Eros drags her back up, they end up fucking. And that was really interesting because I was like, wow, nothing like a near-death experience to get the juices going, and that's great. And they finally like express their love in a very healthy way, because by this point they had earned it, and I was like, great, fantastic, because and like I said, in the original myth, it's like day one when she spends the first night in the palace, they're hooking up, and from that point on they develop their relationship. The relationship develops on an intimate level, and then eventually Psyche realizes that she's pregnant, and Eros is like, oh yeah, just coincidental. Why do you have two heartbeats? Like, sir, you know why she has two heartbeats. Like, I don't understand why he asked that like it was some weird mystery that he wasn't really like sure of, outside of the fact that I know in the story it's made very clear that Eros doesn't spend a lot of time among humans. I think he knows where babies come from. Like, it's his whole dominion. I think he knows where babies come from. So I think maybe that could have been like the first clue. Like, they've been hooking up. Now she has two heartbeats. It's not like she just grew a second heart. Humans don't do that. Maybe he doesn't know, because, like I said, he doesn't have a lot of experience with humans, even though he spends his time messing up their lives with his, like, mischievous little arrows. But when he asked her why, I was like, sir, you know. You know. What a weird way to introduce that. You know. But then, like, within a day or two after this announcement where they're like celebrating that they are going to have a baby, Psyche gets to visit Iphigenia, or Iphigenia gets to visit Psyche, and all this doubt gets put in her mind about who her husband actually is, and that's what sets the whole wheels in motion for her to try to see him in the dark, and when they see each other, they are ripped apart. So I'm going to pause right there to jump over to Iphigenia, because the fact that they included her story in this was really interesting to me. It was sort of interesting to see, not like the story of Troy through the eyes of the women in there, because that's interesting on its own right. But what was interesting to me was we were seeing it not from like the women, but just from Psyche's perspective, like somebody else's take on that war who isn't directly involved in that war. Like, she had no stakes in the game, although her kingdom might have gotten involved and then eventually gets involved because her parents pass away. So they end up getting taken over by Odysseus. Yes. And Odysseus ends up helping her kingdom join the fight, whatever, and managing it, and then it ends up going through a bunch of male succession BS, because nobody's just going to give it to Psyche, although they should have. And I really wanted her to, like, come back with her godly husband and be like, give me my kingdom, bitches, so she could give it to somebody else, but they didn't do that. They didn't follow up on that. That little trail died. But we get to see everything at, like, the start of, like, Helen's marriage to Agamemnon, sort of the fallout aftermath. We get to see Iphigenia thinking that she's going to get to marry Achilles, and it seems like in this version of the story, Achilles also believes that he's marrying Iphigenia, and because I've read the myth a few different ways, where it just seems like Achilles isn't really, like, he doesn't really know what's happening behind the scenes. Like, they never actually tell him that Iphigenia is engaged to him. They just tell Iphigenia so that they can get her to where they need to get her so that they can do their sacrifice. But in this one, they go through the entire process of pretending to have a wedding, having them meet at the altar so that she can have her throat sliced at the altar in front of everybody, which is gruesome. And her father is the biggest asshole in the history of assholes for that move there in regards to this book, because what the fuck? What the actual fuck? And, like, there's a lot of, like, little bits of foreshadowing a little bit with, like, the themes and the just little tidbits here and there. Like, we already know what happens. If you are familiar with the story of Troy, you know what's going to happen to Iphigenia as you're reading, so there's already that mounting dread if you're aware. But there's little bits of, like, information here and there as you're reading the preparations for her wedding and the things leading up to that, that sort of imply that this isn't going to be what she thinks it's going to be, even though she is 100% convinced that this is what's going to happen, and she's very excited for it. Like, just in the way that they're doing her wedding, the way that, like, all the proper things aren't being observed, and it's sort of being written off as, like, well, it's a war, they're getting ready for war right now, they're at a war camp, you can't really do all the things you would normally do for a wedding. But considering how high profile this wedding is, and how high profile Iphigenia is in relation to all this, like, it should be higher. Like, it should be a bigger occasion than it is, but it's sort of being done on, like, a budget, with lots of, like, corners being cut, and everyone's trying to write it off like it's the war, but it's really just sort of foreshadowing that this is a sham of a wedding. And poor Iphigenia, she has such an interesting character growth, because she wants to be like Psyche when she meets Psyche, and even has Psyche teach her how to use the bow, and then decides that she was going to be a priestess of Artemis, and then leaves being a priestess of Artemis to help her father, who treats her like shit, and it's sort of apparent that she really is interested in being in love. Like, she wants to find a good husband and get married and do all those things, but she also doesn't want to give up the independence that being a priestess of Artemis gives her. So she becomes very competent as a priestess of Artemis, and then leaves anyways to go do these things, and then, you know, see if she can use her knowledge and skills as a priestess of Artemis. Also, her tactical mind, because it's shown that she's not just, like, a skilled priestess, but also very intelligent and popular for being that intelligent. So she had all this potential. Like, she could have been a blessing to her people, and her father still kills her anyways in an attempt to, like, either appease Artemis, who is holding the winds hostage from their ships, or to say fuck you to Artemis, because she is a priestess of Artemis, in regards to her holding the winds hostage. But apparently, however, depending on how you read that, either Artemis is, like, appeased by the sacrifice and therefore releases the winds, or she's so shocked by the sacrifice that she releases the winds like accidentally, and the Greeks are able to capitalize that and immediately set sail, and they leave. Like, nobody holds any funerals, nobody tries to bury her body or anything. It's her mother and Psyche, and her sister, who all are like left with the burden of having to bury Iphigenia after this brutal slaughter. And it's just a really sad, poignant story that you don't really get a lot of like aftermath to. They don't really talk about like what Clytemnestra does, or what happens to her sister or anything afterwards. It just sort of, once that's done and Psyche leaves that situation, we never revisit it, which is one of those like little plot threads that I was like, tiny bit more resolution right here would have been perfect. The other one that I was thinking about, hold on, let me rack my brain for a sec. So it was the story of what happens after Troy. I literally just paused so I could do this. What happens with her parents and the fallout of that, because like her parents die one after the other while she's away with in Eros's palace, and when she comes back she finds out that they're dead, and basically her kingdom has been usurped from underneath her until she can present her husband to take over. And at this time they've been separated, so she can't present her husband, so they're like, okay, well, sucks to suck, you're just a lady, every claim you have to the throne is moot. And she can't bring up that she has a child because her child would be in danger, but like we never revisit what happens to her kingdom, and she doesn't get to say goodbye to her parents in any way, shape, or form. Even when she gets to go finally to the underworld and like gets to see stuff down there, she doesn't get to like say goodbye to her parents, which is sad because her parents really loved the shit out of her. And I mean, that's kind of the nature of death, so I understand why that plot point didn't get resolved in any way, shape, or form. But I wanted that to come back up again, like her to mention it maybe, and I'm sure like she does, because you know, there's a lot of time that happens between this point in the book and the end of the book. A lot of time passes. So I'm sure she brought it up eventually, but like we don't get to see it on page, and so that was like a plot point that I was like, I kind of wish that had a neater bow on it. At least if, you know, she could mention it in the ending of the book, it would be, you know, satisfying. But at any rate, jumping back to the main story, while they're separated, they're like, Eros is imprisoned, and Aphrodite like really drives the nail in. Like, she starts lying to him, trying to manipulate him, gaslight him, do all the things to make him feel shitty for not only like low-key betraying her and not telling her that he fucked up, but also for hiding Psyche from her, and also she just doesn't like him. And so like this was, you know, her opportunity to really needle away at him and cause some like psychological damage while she's there. And then Psyche is just trying to get back to Eros and trying to figure out how to do that, and the only way she can do that is by agreeing to be Aphrodite's handmaiden and doing some tasks for her. And Aphrodite gives her like impossible tasks that would be really hard even if you were a god, and she starts to cut off all her help for her. So at first Zephyrus helps her travel across the world to go do the first task, and then she's like, hell no, you can't help her anymore. So she has to rely on the potion that turns her into a butterfly so she can fly back to where she needs to get to do the second task. And at this point in the book, we sort of come back up to the myth where Psyche is so beloved in the mythology that people are willing to help her, that gods are willing to help her. And in the story, that's also like elaborated on like a bit more. It's not just like, oh, well, she's so pretty and nice, like I'm gonna help her do whatever. People are genuinely impressed by her, particularly like Demeter is. So Demeter pretends to be like an old lady in a hut who has no help or anything, and Psyche's like, I really have somewhere to be, I have a timeline, I have a limit, like I gotta get there, but fuck, I can't leave without helping this woman because she's so helpless and nobody's here doing it, and I would be a bad person if I didn't help this lady out or like, you know, do these things for her. And like Demeter is so impressed by like how dutiful Psyche is that she's like, okay, yeah, I'll actually help you out. Also impressed by the fact that Psyche sees the value of every life, and I think that has to do with like her greater understanding of like life in general and seeing things from different perspectives that she got from Medusa. because she ends up letting a bunch of ants, like, she gives ants a bunch of food and does not stomp on them or anything like that. She gives them some food as she's like walking on her path to go do this thing, and Demeter's so impressed that she even cares for lives that are as small as an ant's that she ends up helping her with the task of like sorting out all the grain. And so that was her second task. She sorted out a bunch of grain. The first task was to get the wool off of the sheep of the sun that you can't touch because they're fiery hot. But she managed to do that with like some cleverness. So like Psyche did that with some help from Zephyrus, because Zephyrus got her there. But she managed to do the task on her own when she realized that she could just pick up the wool off the ground without having to approach these like murderous, super hot like sheep. She was like, win. So Psyche does the first task basically on her own with a little bit of assistance and like transportation from Zephyrus, and then Zephyrus is told he can't help her anymore. Then she gets help from Demeter to do the second task, which is sort a bunch of grains out by type, and there's like a mountain of them, and the ants and all the bugs and stuff come to help her do that. They're sent by Demeter. And then Demeter helps her get to the underworld, where she can get Persephone's beauty cream from the Queen of the Underworld. And so like she gets a lot of assistance. This time she has offerings, she's ready, she has money for the ferryman, so when she goes back to the Underworld she doesn't immediately die like she did the first time. She gets to meet up with Medusa again. They get to have a conversation where they touch base on that what makes a hero thing. And Psyche's answer has changed now because she's got a different understanding, but even then she feels like it's not a good enough answer, so it's something, you know, she wants to revisit again later the next time she sees Medusa, which I thought was an interesting point, is that she continues to evolve her perspective, so she knows that when she gets to see Medusa again, she's gonna tell her like a better answer than she did this time, even though she does impress Medusa this time. And then when she goes to see Persephone is like not unsympathetic, but she's also like a little bit in her Dread Queen era, and I'm like, wow, okay, interesting take. Interesting take. I love to see Persephone as Dread Queen of the Underworld. It suits her original mythological origins. I did not like seeing the whole dynamic of like Adonis and stuff, but it worked for the story. It shows that even like the most noble of gods can be petty, and it was a little bit sad, but you know. Not a great take, but not the worst possible take. So also fine. But what ends up happening is because Persephone and Aphrodite have been having this back and forth over Adonis, they're like rivals now, where they're just being jerks to each other. So she sends back Psyche with her beauty cream, but her beauty cream is actually cursed. And it would be fine for an immortal to handle, but it's not fine for a mortal to handle. And what ends up happening is that, like Eros, for the first time in her entire life, Psyche fumbles the bag, she trips, she ends up getting hit with the curse and basically nearly dying. And you might be like, well, what happened to Eros and all this? Well, Eros has been, he was locked in prison, then his sister Eris came and she freed him. And this is a point where he realizes he's been kind of a jerk because he's had his walls up so high that he missed the fact that his sister actually cares for him, even if, they don't necessarily always get along. And, she tells him that she doesn't just care for him like a sister would. She would have married him if, he was interested. So, like, that's how much she cares for him. And she continues to care for him even though he rejected her, which was sweet. But then I was like, stop bringing up that you're going to get married. That's not cute. But, that's just how the Greeks do. But then, he goes to seek out the help of Hecate, and Hecate ends up helping. And like prior to Persephone, blah 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 blah. Prior to Psyche going to the underworld, Eros was able to, with Hecate's help, send her a message to be like, "Please help my wife," and she does. And she manages to ask her mother Demeter to also help her, god damn, these P names, man, help Psyche as well, which is why Demeter wanted to check her out first in the first place. So so Eros has been working in the background to get Psyche the help she needs to get through this, which I thought was a good way to show that it's not just like coincidentally because Psyche is like an amazingly, perfectly beautiful, wonderful person, not that she isn't, that these gods and everybody are helping her out, but it's like the teamwork, the combo of her character being enough to impress the gods, and then Eros also loving her so much that he's taking all these risks to make sure that she gets the help she needs so that she doesn't die doing these impossible tasks that Aphrodite has set for her. And I really liked that aspect. I also really liked Hecate's like characterization in the story, because they have her in her old crone aspect, and she's not just like goddess of magic and like living as a hag in the woods like doing her witchy things. She's also just like, I don't need your arrows or you to make somebody fall in love with me. I can do that on my own. And the only thing that she takes from Eros in exchange for like her assistance are 2 feathers from his wing. One that she uses for the spell she's making for him, and one that she's going to keep for herself in case she decides to take a lover. So like, she's so proficient with magic that she doesn't even need Eros's abilities. She can do it on her own. And I just love that little tidbit where she was like, I don't need your help. I can do it myself. So I loved her characterization in the book. I absolutely loved it. And then once she's able to like achieve all these tasks, Psyche technically fails to deliver the beauty cream to Aphrodite because she trips and she fumbles the bag, gets hit with the curse, and is in like a sleep like death, approaching death. So Eros has to go seek apotheosis for her, which is turning her into a god so that she'll survive this curse. And there's like a whole like council vote. They call all the gods in, even the minor gods and the titans that are like still existing. They all come to Olympus to vote on it, and they end up even getting like Gaia to come up and... Sorry, that's my cat feeder. So they even get Gaia to come back up, even though she's been silent for... I think it's malfunctioning. Because it's been like 2 minutes since it was supposed to go off. But they even get Gaia to come back up and cast her own vote, which I'm like, I feel like since she's been dormant this entire time, just listening to Eros, because they used to be friends, and then she went dormant, and she comes all the way out of the ground to cast her vote. Her vote should have counted for like 20, because she's like one of the first beings, and mother to all, and they were like, oh wow, this is impressive. And then it just ends up counting for 1 vote, and I was like, no, her vote should be 20, especially with all the effort it took for her to get up there and how like terrifyingly magnificent she was. In my brain, I definitely imagined her to be super terrifyingly magnificent, although made out of like dirt, so it worked. A little bit like Tafiti in Moana, but made of dirt and not plants. That's where my brain was. So they get all these people to vote for her. She ends up having a lot more support on the side of the like Olympians, especially the minor gods and stuff, who vote for her, because they're rooting for this little story, and they're also a little bit terrified of Eros. And I feel like not enough gods were terrified of Eros because he doesn't have a lot to like argue for why she should be a god. But then he ends up telling them, like, he threatens them all, like, if she dies, I will ruin all of your lives and your love, and I will do all the things I can in my power to be the greatest menace you've ever known. And they still vote against him, and I'm like, I don't think you guys know. You guys weren't friends with him to begin with. This guy was not your buddy before, when he was just doing his little minor shenanigans, and now you're going to just let him haul off unleashed without any concern for what, so, like, nothing? No? Okay. So, like, yeah, they just wrote that off, and voted against him, and then they decide, like, we're just gonna do it anyways. So, like, Hecate already knows how to do the spell, she's the one who would do it, so they're like, just fucking do it. And she does, because she's like, yeah, alright. I don't see a problem with that. I'm not afraid of Zeus, and she isn't. She isn't in the mythology, she isn't in this book, so she does it anyways, and they are able to resurrect Psyche by making her a goddess, and she becomes the goddess of the soul, and it's a really great, really satisfying conclusion. And if you hadn't caught on to this point, the monster that she was supposed to defeat, the one that all the gods were afraid of, was Eros. It was technically love, because she also sort of wins against Aphrodite in the story. So you can look at it two different ways, I guess. You can look at it as her defeating the goddess of love, who everybody is afraid of, or just her being able to quell the nature of Eros by getting married and letting him experience love, so he understands how it works. Because in this story, there is a moment that sticks with him when he first decides to start meddling in the love lives of mortals, where he makes, I can't remember her name, but she was in love with the hero Bellerophon, but she was married to the king that he was visiting. So he's the one who made her fall in love with Bellerophon, and Bellerophon rejects her. And he rejects her in a way that's really cold, and Eros takes it really personally because he's like, he doesn't deserve this woman and her love because he treated her so coldly. But what ends up happening is because she gets rejected and she's embarrassed, she ends up killing herself and basically saying that Bellerophon assaulted her, and then she kills herself. And that sticks with him for a long time. Like, he thinks about that situation constantly, and he doesn't understand why she would do that, why this happened this way, why it all failed so spectacularly. And it's not until he meets Psyche, and then Psyche's like, well, she had to, because there's not a lot of choices left when you're a woman. And she explains, like, the side from a human woman's perspective, that he finally understands where he erred and how he wronged the woman and not how it was Bellerophon's fault. And so, like, having Psyche there to sort of explain the human experience, to be the goddess of the soul, to counterbalance just the desire aspect of Eros's nature, basically conquers this monster who would have continued to just sort of afflict the lives of mortals and gods alike without impunity, because he didn't understand their lived experience. He didn't spend any time among them. And I think that was a really great way to end the story. I really enjoyed the story. Even the little afters about, you know, their lives together and how she tries to help people as time goes on, as a minor goddess with not a lot of influence. I just really enjoyed the story, and that's basically every thought I had. And I said I wasn't going to do the thing I did with Atalanta, but I did. So I'm going to wrap up the video now, before I continue to just ramble about it. But let me know if you guys read this book, if you like this book, if you made it to the end of the video. I want you to know that I appreciate your faces. And then we will be continuing this discussion over on the book club chat. So if you have read this book and would like to join that, you can join us over there. Let me know. Send me a message on Insta, and I will add you to it. All my info is in the description box below, and that's gonna be it for me, guys. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.